The war had turned the once beautiful moon into a gray wasteland. Craters and broken towers stretched as far as the eye could see, twisted metal and dust covering every inch. Sergeant Leon Hayes crouched behind a shattered wall, listening to the distant hum of energy weapons and the occasional crack of explosions. His team had been ordered to secure the northern ruins, but the mission had gone wrong almost immediately. Leon's visor displayed the map of the city, dotted with red markers, enemy positions, but one movement caught his eye. A faint figure struggled among the rubble, barely moving. He squinted. It was an alien, smaller than the soldiers he had fought before, young by the looks of it, her golden eyes flickering like small flames in the dust. "Sir, are you seeing this?" Private Diaz whispered from behind. Leon nodded without taking his eyes off her. "That's not a combatant. She's trapped. We can't leave her." The squad hesitated. Rules were clear. Human soldiers were not to engage in rescue missions when under fire. But Leon didn't care. He had learned long ago that some things were worth breaking rules for. He moved cautiously through the broken streets, keeping low as debris cracked underfoot. The alien's breathing was shallow, her small hand reaching weakly toward him. When she saw him, she whispered something in her strange musical language. He didn't understand the words, but the tone carried fear and desperation. "Don't stop," she said. Leon froze, unsure what she meant. At first he thought she wanted him to hurry, to keep moving, but the way her hand trembled, the way her eyes locked on his, told him otherwise. She was pleading for life. "Hold on, I've got you," he said softly, moving closer. The wreckage above her was heavy. A large metal beam had pinned her shoulder, bending cruelly around her armor. He knelt beside her, pulling his knife and cutting through the small pieces of debris that he could reach. She hissed in pain but did not resist, only watching him with trust and hope that he barely understood. "Stay calm. You're going to be okay," Leon said, sweat running down his brow. Dust filled the air, making it hard to see or breathe. He gritted his teeth and lifted the beam as best he could. "Almost there," he muttered, feeling his muscles burn. He looked around. The enemy patrols were nearby, but they hadn't noticed him yet. Every second counted. The alien woman used her last strength to push herself slightly, letting him slip the beam out fully. She gasped and collapsed into his arms. Leon carried her to a safer position, a small hollow in the ruins where debris provided some cover. His team caught up, eyes wide at the sight of him holding an alien woman. "Sergeant, you're going to get us all killed," Diaz said, worry in his voice. "I don't care," Leon replied firmly. "She's alive because I'm not stopping." The woman trembled and her lips parted to speak again. Her words were broken, some sounds he couldn't imitate. But the meaning was clear. She was asking him to keep her alive. She was saying the same thing again, "Don't stop." Leon knelt beside her and opened his medkit. The alien's armor was damaged, but her skin was soft and pale in a way that reminded him of humans, yet different, like moonlight trapped in living form. Carefully, he cleaned the small cuts on her arms and legs, trying to keep her calm. "You're going to be fine," he said again, though even he wasn't sure if it was true. Her breathing was ragged and every movement was a struggle. Yet despite the fear in her eyes, she looked at him with a trust that made his heart tighten. Minutes passed like hours. The moon's sky was red with distant fires, and Leon could hear the faint hum of approaching enemy ships. Every second he knew could be their last. But he didn't move. He refused to leave her side. Finally, she spoke again, this time in words he recognized, broken but understandable. "Human, don't stop." Her voice was faint, almost a whisper, but it carried urgency. Leon understood then it wasn't about him, it was about her survival. She wanted him to fight for her life even when she couldn't. Leon's jaw tightened. "I won't stop. Not until you're safe," he promised. He checked her armor, noting the cracks and the burns from energy blasts. She shivered violently, either from pain or the cold, he couldn't tell. He wrapped his jacket around her and helped her sit against a crumbled wall. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. She tried, but her legs gave out. Leon caught her before she fell again. "Then we'll crawl if we have to," he said with determination. A sudden explosion rocked the ground nearby. Dust and rubble rained down on them. Leon's heart pounded, but he stayed steady. He looked down at her and her eyes met his. Full of fear, yes, but also a faint glimmer of hope. You saved me," she whispered. Her voice was soft, fragile, but it carried something deep, something human-like. Leon shook his head. "No, You saved yourself. I'm just making sure you get the chance. The sound of approaching boots made him tense. Enemy scouts were close. He knew they couldn't stay where they were for long. He lifted her into his arms again, careful not to jostle her injuries. Every movement was careful, precise, as if the slightest mistake would be fatal. He led them through the ruined streets, keeping low and silent. They passed collapsed towers, pools of blackened water, and twisted metal that looked like the skeletons of fallen buildings. Leon didn't speak much. Words weren't enough. The alien woman seemed to understand him anyway, her hand resting lightly on his arm whenever she could reach. Eventually, they found a small shelter, barely standing but better than the open ruins. Leon laid her down gently. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking shallow breaths. Her golden eyes flickered open again, looking at him. She didn't speak, but the meaning was clear. She was placing her trust entirely in him. Leon sat beside her, watching over her as the distant battle continued. He didn't know what the future held, whether her species would forgive him, whether humanity would ever understand what he had done. But for now, that didn't matter. She was alive, and he would do whatever it took to keep her that way. Hours passed, and the moon's red sky darkened into night. The fires of battle reflected off the ruins, casting long shadows. Leon checked her breathing, adjusted her jacket, and listened. The world had become quiet for a brief moment. She moved slightly, leaning into him. Her hand brushed his arm, a gesture that said more than words ever could. "Thank you. Don't stop." Leon nodded to himself, a quiet promise forming in his heart. He would not stop. Not while she lived. Not while hope still flickered in her eyes. The battle outside continued, but inside the ruined shelter a fragile connection had formed. Human and alien, enemy and survivor, standing together in the ruins of a war neither fully understood. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. He would fight not for glory, not for orders, but for the life of someone who had put her hope entirely in him. And so, in the gray shadows of a war-torn moon, Sergeant Leon Hayes made a vow that would define him. A vow whispered quietly between breaths and broken words, "I won't stop. Not now, not ever." The night on the ruined moon was cold, and the wind howled through broken towers like the cries of lost souls. Inside the small shelter, Leon sat beside the alien woman, gently checking the splints he had made to stabilize her injuries. Her name, he learned slowly, was Irina. The way she said it made him think of sunlight over a calm sea, soft and fragile, yet determined. She opened her eyes slightly and watched him with curiosity. Her gaze seemed to search for answers in him, as if trying to understand why a human soldier would risk his life for her. Leon didn't have the words to explain it. He only knew that he couldn't leave her, not after she had entrusted her life to him. "You need rest," he said quietly, trying to sound firm. "I'll stay here. No one's going to touch you." Irina's breathing was still uneven, and her hand trembled as she reached for his. Leon took it in his own, feeling the tiny pulse of life beneath her skin. It was faint, but it was there, and that was enough for him. Hours passed slowly. The distant sounds of war became background noise, fading behind the weight of the night. Leon kept talking to her softly, telling her about Earth, about the sun, the ocean, the mountains, and about humanity's endless curiosity. She listened, eyes half closed, absorbing his words, sometimes responding in her broken English or in the musical tones of her own language. He couldn't understand all of it, but he could sense hope in the rhythm of her voice. "You're very strong," she said finally, the words strained but sincere. Leon shook his head with a small smile. "No, you're stronger. You're still alive, and that's the strongest thing I know." Her eyes flickered with something unspoken, gratitude, fear, and a silent plea for survival. Leon realized that what she had said earlier, "Don't stop," wasn't just about survival in the immediate sense. She wanted him to keep fighting, to keep moving forward even when everything seemed lost. She wanted him to carry hope for both of them. As dawn broke over the horizon, the red light of the distant fires painted the ruins in shades of gold and gray. Leon knew they couldn't stay in the shelter forever. Enemy patrols would return, and human forces would likely conduct their next sweep soon. They needed to move. "Can you walk now?" Leon asked, helping Irina to her feet. She swayed, her legs still weak, but she nodded. "I try," she whispered. Leon took her hand, supporting her as they stepped carefully through the rubble. Every step was a struggle. Each broken piece of metal, each crater reminded them both that survival was fragile. But they moved forward, silently agreeing to trust one another. As they crossed the open area, Leon noticed small plants struggling to grow among the ashes. It was a tiny reminder that life persisted even in harsh conditions. He glanced at Irina, and for a moment she seemed almost human in her expression, tired, hopeful, and alive. Suddenly, the ground shook. A distant explosion sent dust into the air, making it hard to see. Leon shielded Irina instinctively. She clung to him, her hands gripping his armor. "Don't stop," she whispered again. Her voice was barely audible over the wind and the distant chaos, but the meaning was clear. He couldn't give up. Not on her. Not on the chance to survive. Leon adjusted his grip and led her toward a collapsed building that offered better cover. Inside, they found a small corridor, relatively intact, with walls that had withstood the recent blasts. He laid her down gently, checking her injuries again. "You're stronger than you think," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to get through this." Irina's golden eyes met his, and for a moment there was understanding without words. She knew he meant it, and he understood her trust. It was fragile, like glass, but it was real. Hours passed. Leon improvised a simple splint for her arm, cleaned minor wounds, and did what he could with limited supplies. He rationed water and some emergency food packets, feeding her slowly. Each movement was careful, deliberate, because any mistake could endanger her. "You never stop," Irina said at one point, her voice weak but filled with emotion. "I told you," Leon replied, smiling faintly. "I won't stop. Not while you're alive." Irina's breathing was steadying slightly, but Leon knew her condition was still critical. He couldn't afford to let his guard down. Outside, the battle raged, but inside this small space, there was a fragile peace, a moment of survival, connection, and trust. As night approached again, Leon realized that Irina's injuries were more serious than he had first thought. She needed proper medical care, but the closest human outpost was too far. They would have to travel under dangerous conditions. The journey would be risky, but there was no choice. He couldn't leave her behind. "We'll have to move," he said, helping her to stand. Her legs trembled, but she nodded. Together they began the slow journey through the ruins, stepping over debris, avoiding open areas, and moving as silently as possible. Every so often, Irina would murmur in her language, and Leon would respond with encouragement. He didn't understand all her words, but he understood the meaning, the plea to survive, the hope for life, and the trust she placed in him. They reached a partially destroyed vehicle, a human transport that had been abandoned. Leon managed to repair it enough to move. He lifted Irina into the passenger seat, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. The engine roared to life and they moved slowly through the shattered city. The landscape outside was hauntingly beautiful. The rising sun reflected off the debris, casting long shadows. Smoke from distant fires drifted through the air, mixing with the red glow of the dawn. Leon glanced at Irina. Her eyes followed the horizon, taking in the strange, ruined beauty of the world. "Almost there," Leon whispered, more to himself than to her. Just a little further. The journey was perilous. Enemy patrols appeared unexpectedly, and Leon had to maneuver carefully to avoid detection. At one point, a blast hit nearby, shaking the vehicle and sending dust into the air. Irina gasped but didn't cry out. She trusted him completely, and he felt the weight of that trust heavily on his shoulders. Finally, they reached a hidden supply depot. Abandoned, but secure, Leon guided the vehicle inside and turned it off. He helped Irina out, supporting her fragile body. She sank onto a pile of supplies, exhausted but alive. Leon checked her injuries again, using the limited medical supplies he had brought. Her breathing was steady, and the faint pulse in her wrist gave him hope. She looked up at him, her golden eyes shining with gratitude. "You, human, strong," she whispered, smiling weakly. Leon shook his head. "No, you're the strong one. You're still here. That's what counts." Hours passed as they rested in the depot. The outside world was still dangerous, but inside there was a quiet sense of safety. Leon kept watch while Irina slept, her body still fragile but recovering slowly. He realized that their connection had grown beyond mere survival. It was a bond of trust, forged in the middle of a war, fragile but unbreakable. Night fell, and Leon finally allowed himself a brief moment of rest. He leaned back, keeping one eye on Irina, Even in sleep, she looked alert, as if aware that her survival depended on him, and he knew it did. As the moonlight filtered through the cracks in the depot's walls, Leon whispered to himself, a promise to keep going no matter what. I won't stop. Not for the enemy. Not for anyone. Only for her. The night was long and the war outside continued, but inside hope survived. And for Leon, that was enough to keep moving forward. To keep fighting, and to keep believing that they could both survive whatever came next. In the quiet moments, he could hear her soft breathing, feel the faint warmth of her hand when it brushed his armor. He knew the journey ahead would be even more dangerous, but he didn't fear it. Not with her depending on him. Not with the promise he had made. Don't stop. The words echoed in his mind, not just a command, but a plea. And Leon would honor it no matter the cost. Together, they rested in the shadow of a broken world, preparing for the challenges that lay ahead. And though danger waited beyond the walls of their temporary refuge, a fragile hope had taken root, one that neither war nor fear could easily destroy. The moon's surface was quiet at first light, but Leon knew calm was only temporary. The distant glow of fires and occasional hum of weapons reminded him that danger was never far. Irina's condition had stabilized, but only slightly. Her energy was low, and every movement required effort. Leon helped her sit up, offering water and small rations he had managed to scavenge. You need strength for the journey ahead, he said softly. We have to move before anyone finds us. Irina nodded weakly, her golden eyes flickering with both exhaustion and determination. Her hand brushed his arm, a small gesture that reminded him why he had chosen to help her in the first place. It wasn't duty or loyalty. It was the simple truth that he could not leave someone who had placed her life entirely in his hands. The first challenge was the terrain. The city had been torn apart by explosions and bombardments, leaving deep craters and jagged metal debris. Leon scouted the path ahead, careful to avoid enemy patrols. Every step forward was slow, deliberate, and exhausting. Irina leaned on him as they moved, each stumble a reminder of how fragile her body remained. Almost there, she whispered, voice faint. Leon glanced at her, feeling a pang of worry. You'll make it, he said, trying to sound confident, though he had doubts himself. They were far from safe, and the enemy was still out there. But he refused to show fear. It would only make her panic. As they navigated through a collapsed tunnel, Leon noticed markings on the walls, strange symbols, unfamiliar to him. He realized that Irina's species had once occupied this place, or at least had been here in significant numbers. She noticed his glance and nodded weakly, her lips forming the sound of a word he could not repeat. It seemed important to her, but she didn't explain. The tunnel opened onto a canyon of jagged rock, the sky above still tinted red by distant fires. Leon scanned the area. Enemy scouts were visible in the distance, moving between craters. He crouched behind a rock formation, helping Irina down so she could rest. They'll see us if we move now, he said. Irina's lips trembled, forming broken words. Leon caught fragments. Signal. Corp. Must. Stop. He frowned. She had been more than a soldier, it seemed. She had a mission, a purpose beyond survival. Something crucial depended on her reaching a certain place. Leon understood then. She wasn't just fleeing from danger. She carried knowledge that could change the course of the war. If she died, countless lives would be lost. And if she survived, perhaps peace, or at least hope, was possible. They waited until the scouts moved further away, then carefully began their journey across the canyon. Every step was painstaking, rocks unstable beneath their feet. Leon kept a firm grip on her arm, supporting her weight when she faltered. You're strong, he said. Stronger than you know. She looked up at him, golden eyes wide. You, human. Strong too, she whispered, her voice weak but meaningful. The canyon stretched on and the sun rose higher, revealing the vast expanse of destruction. They had to cross open ground eventually, and Leon knew it would be dangerous. But Irina's hand tightened around his. He understood her silent plea, don't stop. Keep us alive. When they reached the edge of the canyon, Leon assessed their options. A narrow ledge wound around the cliffside, offering some cover but no guarantees. He helped Irina onto the path, one careful step at a time. Her legs shook, but she didn't complain. Her determination was remarkable. Halfway across, a sudden sound froze them, A patrol of Kareth soldiers had spotted movement below. Leon's heart raced. He shielded Irina, pressing her against the rock wall. "Stay still," he whispered. The soldiers moved past, unaware of their presence, and Leon exhaled quietly. Irina's golden eyes met his, and she nodded faintly. There was no need for words. The meaning was clear. They had survived for now. They continued along the ledge, moving slower than before, but steadily. Leon could see the place Irina had mentioned in fragments, a ruined facility in the distance, surrounded by jagged cliffs and smoke. He realized that this must be the core she had spoken of, a place of great importance to her people and to the war. As they approached, the ground began to shake. Explosions rocked the distant facility, sending clouds of dust and fire into the air. Leon helped Irina across unstable sections of the path, every step a test of balance and endurance. "You must stop," she said suddenly, her voice strained. Leon frowned. She looked at him, golden eyes filled with pain and urgency. Then he understood. She didn't mean stop him. She meant stop the destruction, stop the war that threatened countless lives. He nodded firmly. "We'll stop it, together." Finally, they reached the edge of the facility. Leon surveyed the area. It was in ruins, yet there were signs of life. Small energy signals flickering, machines still operational despite the damage. Irina leaned heavily on him, exhausted, yet she insisted on moving forward. Inside the facility, Leon realized the truth. Irina was not a simple soldier. She had been part of a Kareth scientific team, assigned to prevent a catastrophe. The energy core at the center of the facility was unstable, capable of destroying the entire moon if left unchecked. Her defection had been an act of courage, an attempt to save lives on both sides of the war. She risked everything, Leon thought, glancing at her fragile form. And now it's on us to finish what she started. They navigated the ruined hallways, avoiding debris and occasional patrols. Leon carried her when necessary, moving with careful precision. Irina whispered instructions, broken words mixed with gestures pointing to machines and consoles. It became clear that she knew how to stabilize the core, but she lacked the strength to complete the process alone. Leon worked alongside her, following her guidance. Together they rerouted energy flows, adjusted controls, and monitored the unstable core. Sweat poured from Leon's brow as he concentrated, but Irina's presence reminded him why he couldn't fail. "Almost done," she whispered, her voice weak, trembling with every word. Suddenly, the facility shook violently. A burst of energy from the core sent sparks flying. Leon shielded Irina, protecting her from falling debris. She clutched his arm, golden eyes wide with fear. "Don't stop," she gasped. He understood completely now. She wasn't commanding him. She was pleading for life. For herself, for him, for everyone who depended on their success. He gritted his teeth and continued working, steadying the unstable controls. Minutes stretched like hours. Every decision mattered. One mistake and they would both die. But Leon didn't hesitate. He followed her instructions, acting as her hands when hers were too weak, moving faster than fatigue should have allowed. Finally, the core stabilized. The energy flow balanced, the hum of power becoming steady and safe. Irina collapsed against him, exhausted but alive. Leon held her gently, feeling her fragile heartbeat beneath his hand. "You did it?" she whispered, a faint smile on her lips. "We live," Leon nodded, relief flooding him. "No, you did it. You guided us. You kept us alive." Outside, the ruins were still dangerous, but the immediate threat of the core's explosion was gone. For the first time in days, they could breathe without the constant fear of death looming over them. Irina's eyes closed briefly, and Leon let her rest. He knew they still had a long journey ahead, but the bond between them had grown stronger. Trust, respect, and a shared purpose had formed in the fires of survival. When she awoke, she looked at him and whispered one final time, "Don't stop." Leon smiled, understanding perfectly. He would never stop. Not while she lived. Not while hope remained. Not while there was still a chance to make a difference. Together, human and alien soldier and survivor, they prepared to face the world outside the facility. The journey ahead was uncertain, full of dangers and challenges, but for the first time, they faced it not as enemies or strangers, but as allies. And in that fragile moment, amid the ruins of a war-torn moon, Leon realized that survival was more than a matter of strength. It was a matter of trust, courage, and the unyielding will to protect someone when they could not protect themselves. Don't stop. The words echoed between them, no longer just a plea, but a shared promise. A promise that would carry them through the trials yet to come, as they faced the remnants of a war that had threatened to destroy everything. And though danger still waited beyond the walls of the ruined facility, Leon knew one thing for certain: he would not stop. Not now, not ever. The ruins of the facility were quiet now, but the tension in the air remained. Leon helped Irina to her feet, steadying her fragile frame. Her breathing was shallow, her energy still low, but her golden eyes shone with determination. The core was stabilized, but the war around them had not ended. They had survived the immediate danger, yet countless challenges remained. Leon scanned the horizon. Enemy patrols still roamed the craters, and the skies held the hum of distant spacecraft. Every movement had to be careful, deliberate. There was no room for mistakes. "Can you walk on your own?" Leon asked gently. Irina nodded weakly, though she leaned heavily on him for support. "I try," she whispered. Together they stepped out of the ruined facility, moving through the shattered streets toward safety. The moon's surface was jagged, littered with debris, and the red glow of distant fires painted everything in harsh shadows. Every step was slow, cautious, but they moved steadily. As they traveled, Leon noticed signs that the local Kareth forces had abandoned parts of the city. Burned-out vehicles, empty barricades, and scattered equipment suggested retreat. He hoped it meant the war was shifting, but he knew better than to trust appearances. Danger could return at any moment. Irina spoke in her broken language, pointing to a distant ridge. Leon did not understand the words, but the urgency in her gestures was clear. They had to reach that point. He helped her climb the steep slope, muscles straining with the effort. Each step was a test of endurance, but they pressed on. At the top of the ridge, they found a small clearing shielded by jagged rocks. From here, they could see the expanse of the city below, twisted and broken by war. The sight was grim, yet something about it inspired Leon. Despite the destruction, life persisted. Survivors moved carefully through the ruins, and here, in this small space, they could breathe for a moment. Leon set Irina down gently. "Rest for a while," he said. "We'll plan the next step." She nodded, her golden eyes closing briefly. Leon took a moment to observe her. In the dim light, her features seemed softer, almost human. He realized how remarkable it was that she had survived this long, through injuries, exhaustion, and fear. And yet here she was, alive and fighting, still trusting him completely. Suddenly, a distant transmission crackled in Leon's communicator. He quickly answered, keeping his voice low. "This is Hayes, situation stable. Evac needed for one survivor. Priority access requested." The voice on the other end confirmed the coordinates. Rescue teams were on the way, but it would take time. In the meantime, they had to remain vigilant. Leon turned to Irina. "Help is coming, but we have to hold on a little longer." Irina's hand brushed his arm. She didn't speak, but her eyes said everything. "Don't stop." Hours passed. Leon kept watch, his weapon close, scanning the horizon for any sign of enemy movement. Irina rested against a rock, regaining strength. Her breathing was steadier now, though she still leaned heavily on him whenever she moved. Finally, in the distance, Leon saw the faint glow of approaching vehicles. Rescue teams, armored transports moving carefully through the ruins. Relief flooded him, but he remained alert. They were not safe until they were out of the war zone. The transports reached the ridge, and Leon guided Irina toward them. Soldiers moved quickly, assessing her injuries and preparing her for transport. She allowed them to support her, but her gaze remained fixed on Leon. "You, human," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with emotion. "Strong, helped me." Leon smiled faintly. "No, you're the strong one. You survived everything. I just made sure you had a chance." The soldiers lifted Irina onto a stretcher, securing her carefully. Leon stepped back, watching as she was loaded into the transport. For a brief moment, he hesitated. He had fought to keep her alive, guided her through danger, and now she was leaving. But he knew she would survive because of their efforts, and that was all that mattered. As the transport moved away, Leon felt a strange emptiness. He had grown accustomed to her presence, to the silent trust they had shared. Yet he also felt pride in their achievement, in the bond they had formed, and in the hope they had brought to both sides of the war. He returned to the facility to ensure no critical equipment was left behind. The core remained stable, and the machines that had been salvaged were secured. Leon documented everything, leaving detailed notes for future teams. His mission had changed from simple survival to preserving knowledge and ensuring that Irina's sacrifice and courage would not be forgotten. Hours later, Leon finally allowed himself to rest. He found a small shelter nearby, setting up a temporary camp. The sky was dark now, with faint stars beginning to appear through the red haze. He looked at the horizon, thinking of Irina. Her courage, her trust, and her unwavering plea, "Don't stop," echoed in his mind. He thought of the journey they had shared, the dangers they had overcome, and the fragile hope that had survived despite the chaos. And he understood something vital. Survival was not just about strength or skill. It was about courage, trust, and the willingness to fight for others when they could not fight for themselves. The transport returned to human territory the next day, delivering Irina to a secure medical facility. Leon followed, ensuring she was in safe hands. Doctors and specialists took over, but she looked for him immediately. Their eyes met, golden and brown, and for a moment the chaos of war faded. "You, alive," she whispered, smiling weakly. Leon nodded. "And you will stay alive. I promise." The medical staff began their work, stabilizing her fully. Leon stayed nearby, refusing to leave her side until he was certain she was safe. The bond they had formed, tested by danger and adversity, had become unbreakable. Days later, Irina was able to sit up, her strength returning slowly. She spoke to Leon in broken English, telling him fragments of her story. How she had been a scientist trying to prevent the moon from being destroyed, how she had risked everything to protect life on both sides, and how her people had misunderstood her intentions. Leon listened, amazed. She had risked death to save countless others, and he had been there to ensure she survived. Together they had changed the course of events, and their actions would be remembered as a turning point in the war. Irina's recovery continued, and soon she was well enough to leave the medical facility. Leon accompanied her to the memorial site established on the moon, a place dedicated to those who had fought and survived. The ruins had been partially restored, a reminder of the resilience of life and the courage of those who had refused to give up. At the memorial, Irina placed her hand on a plaque dedicated to the survivors. She looked at Leon, golden eyes shining with gratitude and something more, a deep respect that transcended language. "You never stopped," she said softly. Leon smiled. "I promised I wouldn't, and I never will. Not for you, not for anyone who depends on it." They stood together in silence, watching the sun rise over the moon's horizon. The red glow of fires had faded, replaced by the pale light of a new day. The ruins no longer seemed so threatening. Life had returned, slowly but surely, and hope had taken root where destruction had once ruled. Irina looked at Leon and spoke a single word, clear and strong this time. "Thank you." Leon shook his head. "No, we did it together. You kept going when you could barely move. You gave me a chance to fight, to protect, and to survive with purpose. For a long time they remained there, side by side, survivors of a war that had tested them beyond imagination. The bond they had formed, forged in danger and tempered by trust, would never fade." As they turned to leave the memorial, Leon felt a quiet pride. He had kept his promise. He had not stopped. And Irina had survived because of it. Together they had ensured that hope, courage, and trust would live on, even in a world scarred by war. And though the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Leon would never stop fighting for life, for hope, and for those who could not fight for themselves. "Don't stop." The words were no longer a plea, they were a vow, carried forward by two survivors who had faced the worst and emerged stronger, bonded by courage, trust, and the unyielding will to survive. In the end, that vow would define them both, a testament to the power of hope, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, life and courage could endure.